The whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, and wiser people so full of doubts. Bertrand Russell. All right. Good morning. Welcome to another morning episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you're tuning in live, especially want to thank you for giving me your time so early. So today, I was trying to figure out what am I going to talk about? And I was out late last night at a party with my wife. She had a real estate event. So I went out and I decided just to do the random dad musings. Normally I do this on Wednesdays. I try to have these preset days, make it a little easier to get this, to for me to do the show, and then some consistency for you, the listener, the audience, the viewer, however you want to define yourself. But given all things, I thought, there's a whole bunch of different things, and they just don't really fit taking any one of them. So we're going to take all of them. We're just going to do a random dad musings, and this will be the eighth one. And that's just basically where I just grab a bunch of topics and talk about different things. And there's not necessarily a connection between them. So the first thing that I want to talk about, it's I don't always get a chance to watch other shows. It's funny, actually. Some people will be like, "Hey, man, did you see this podcast episode?" And I'm like, "Nope." Or did I listen to one? And the answer is usually no, because I am busy preparing for mine, and then just I've got work and you know family and just things around the house. Just I'm busy. Just don't really get a chance. And a lot of the things that I do tend to require my attention, so I don't really get that opportunity to listen very often. But I saw that John Oliver apparently had this 30-minute spiel about Elon Musk, and I was kind of intrigued. Now, Elon for me is not like some untouchable character. Like, anybody can be criticized. Nobody is exempt from criticism. But I tend to think that sometimes, big name people like Elon Musk and whatever, they get unfairly treated in some sense. And so I was curious what John Oliver had to say, and I tuned in, and it was surprisingly he was fair in some ways. Like, yeah, hey, here's some good things that he's done, and here's some criticism, and he kind of threw in that he did his normal where he presents it with a with his style of comedy and whatnot, and it was amusing. I thought it was kind of interesting. But there was one part that just kind of stuck out. It actually had really nothing. It didn't have a whole lot to do with Musk himself. But I want to show this clip because I just was I kind of got a little giddy on the inside. So let me play this. Let's just kind of start right off with this clip right here.
That trend continued through SpaceX's subsequent efforts, something that, as this former head of NASA points out, is not something that they would ever be able to get away with.
if we lost rockets at the rate that Elon Musk loses his big Starship, NASA would have been out of business. Congress would have shut us down. If we lost one Starship, let alone 6 or however many it's been, we can't do that.
Right. The US government can't waste billions of dollars just blowing things up in the vague hope that it'll somehow turn into a success, unless, of course, those things are Iraq or Afghanistan. So,
Nice. So, look, I thought that was go ahead and watch the whole show. I recommend it. It was kind of amusing if you're interested. I mean, it is all about Musk, but I felt like that particular one was just a nice little dig. I can always appreciate a good dig at the U.S. government and its incompetency. So I just wanted to show you that. We're going to move on to some other things here. So I've got a couple like bill reviews that I think would be interesting. So there are two of them, both of them here in Florida. It's just what happened to come across my radar. So that's what we've got. So let's go ahead and play this media clip here for the first one. So there are two bills. Actually, I take it back. There's one bill. One is a joint resolution. So it's not quite the same as a bill. But we're going to start with the bill first. So let's play this clip and see what it's about.
And new at 10, a Florida lawmaker introduced a bill to ban LGBTQ and pride flags from state government buildings and facilities. Republican David Barrero's bill proposal says that government entities should maintain neutrality when representing political viewpoints through flag displays. The legislation also says private individuals won't be restricted in expressing private speech or viewpoints protected by the First Amendment. If the bill is passed, the U.S. flag must be prominently displayed in a position superior to any other flag.
All right. So apologies there. I was trying to set something up here. So let's get back. So there's a bill and it's going to ban flags, or at least some flags. And what I was trying to pull up here, and let me see if I can still do this kind of on the fly. I don't know why I messed up on getting one thing here. So, but we will get that fixed right here, right now. There we are. All right. So this is what I'm going to show you what. There we go. All right. So this is what Equality Florida had tweeted. This is why I saw it. So they said just in a new Florida House bill, HB 901, would ban cities, counties, schools, state colleges, and state universities from flying LGBTQ or transgender pride flags. If conservative lawmakers won't stop trying to erase us, we won't stop showing up to oppose them. I got to move my head. My head is always in the way of where things need to, big head. At any rate. All right. So we're going to come back to that in just a moment, but I want to actually take a look at the bill and because, they're saying here, like they're trying to erase us and, they're making a big issue out of this. And, if you look it up, there are several news stories about this bill. So I was like, all right, well, let's see what's in the bill. Let's see if it's as bad as they say it is. Maybe I'll oppose it, maybe I won't. But let's take a look here. So we've got this bill, and let's see, here it is. Let's go back up a little bit. Okay, we don't really need it. This is just the very beginning. We don't need to worry about that. Remember, folks, when you're reading a bill, the way that it works is if they're modifying existing ordinance or legislation or statutes, then there will be some indicator of what is being added and what is being removed. In Florida, frequently you see that it's underlined if they're going to add, strike through if it's going to be removed, and then anything else is stuff that's just kind of in between somewhere. And so this one actually just adds. Okay. Yep. Just adds, and it's only 2 pages. Now, I'll be honest. I'm not always a big fan of bills in the first place. But when you make them short, that's a good start. Let's see where we go with this. So, excuse me. So it says, for the purpose of this section, the term governmental entity means a governmental agency, a local government, or another unit of local government. It includes public schools, public colleges, and public universities. All right. So it says, and it's I didn't even highlight it because it's so short. When they're short like this, I don't even need to, because I would just be highlighting the whole thing. A governmental entity may not erect or display a flag that represents a political viewpoint, including but not limited to a politically partisan, racial, sexual orientation, and gender or political ideology viewpoint. The governmental, scroll down to the next page, entity must remain neutral when representing political viewpoints in displaying or erecting a flag. This subsection does not limit the ability of a private individual to express private speech or viewpoints or exercise rights protected by the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. A governmental agency, governmental entity to display or erect a flag required or, I mean, oh yeah, okay. So it does not limit the ability of a governmental agency entity to display or erect a flag required or authorized by general law. And then three, a governmental entity that displays the United States flag must display the United States flag in a prominent position that is superior to any other flag that is also displayed. Now, this is not the first one that they've done. There was a bill a while back, probably about a year ago, where they would narrow it down to like 4 different flags that were allowed to be flown. So this is not a new issue. Um, I'm kind of ambivalent on this bill. On one hand, I get it. I like, should we be flying any other flag that's related to specific viewpoints? You know, the partisan, racial, sexual. Are these appropriate? And the answer is they're not. And why aren't they not? Well, because one of the comments that you see a lot of times, especially with the pride flags, people say, "Well, this is a flag about inclusion and equity and justice." So it's about good things, right? Why wouldn't we want to fly this? This is about keeping people diverse and all these nice sounding things. However, at the end of the day, these flags are divisive because we are literally having arguments in society about to what extent do we implement these things, right? We're not just, it's not just a flag that says, hey, this flag is for everybody, and then nobody's arguing about it. No, there are arguments, and the arguments are, to what extent do we do these things, and then for people that oppose them, how do we respond to them, right? And I want you to take a look again at the comment that was made by, what was it, Equity Florida? Here it goes. Yeah, Equality Florida. I'm sorry. So let's take a look back at this. So if conservative lawmakers won't stop trying to erase us, we won't stop showing up to oppose them. Right? That's divisive right there. Like, even like, they're not just saying, "Hey, you know what? We feel like this is something that includes everybody." They are literally saying, "You are trying to erase us," which, by the way, I find that kind of weird. And I didn't pull up the clip, but you may remember years ago, I think it was at the Charlottesville, where all the people were walking around with tiki torches and they were like, "You will not replace us." And that's the whole replacement theory. Tub and I talked about that last Friday. I think no, it wasn't last Friday. It was the Friday before last. We talked about this. If it's a matter of if it's a matter of replacing people as a political strategy, yeah, we have a problem there. But if it's just a matter of like changing demographics, I mean, get over yourselves. That's related to the tiki torch folk. But here, it sounds eerily similar, like very much like you're trying to replace us with other people that are not LGBTQ. And so I'm kind of torn because I don't really want to put a lot of energy into arguing over what flag gets flown. And there is an argument to be made that when it comes to local communities, they should be able to govern themselves. So imagine for a moment, imagine that Jacksonville had a huge LGBTQ community. And imagine that that Jacksonville was known for that, right? We're just assuming here. And so it may not be as bad to Jacksonville if we were to have an LGBTQ flag flying in, in one of our like schools or what have you, right? Like it might make sense for this particular community. But then and again, we're still imagining. Now imagine that you go down to Orlando and they didn't. It would probably in this argument in this case, I should have switched them, but whatever. So imagine we go down to Orlando and they don't have that. There's something else that is big in their community, right? And so then maybe they want a flag that kind of represents that for their community. So there is an argument to be made that should the state at the state level impose this limitation. And I'm sympathetic to that, right? Because this is home rule. This is the idea that local communities know how they want to be governed best, how they want to be represented best. And as a rule of thumb, I tend to defer to the local community and say, hey, look, the state should not abuse its power and force people in Orlando to behave the same as to act in the same way as, I don't want to say act. Uh, they should not force people in Orlando to be governed in the same way as people in Jacksonville are governed. So that's a fair argument to be had, but that's not the argument that's being made here. The argument that's being made is, hey, you're trying to erase us. And I think that goes toward why this legislation is deemed necessary by the authors, because they're like, look, this is such a divisive issue. Now, we could be honest, okay? Like on some level, the Republicans are probably just finding some way to get one over on their opponents. At the end of the day, that's what it really is, probably. And they just happen to have found a way to do it that that has a strong argument behind it. Because if we go back to that bill, we go back to the bill here and we look at it. Let's go back to that bill. All right, here we are. It says the second page actually here. It said, well, it's kind of both. The governmental entity must remain neutral when representing political viewpoints in displaying or erecting a flag. Right? Like that is actually true. We've had this argument in the past. This argument when I was younger was about whether or not like the 10 commandments could be posted, and it's a very similar argument. And a lot of people, they said, hey, I'm not a religious person. Therefore, the 10 commandments in the courtroom is not appropriate. The 10 commandment, a lot of times there was like a rock or something like that that had like the 10 commandments etched in it, those kind of things. They would say like that's not appropriate to be, in the Capitol or, in this government building. So we've had this argument, and it's kind of interesting because at one point it was the Republicans who were on the receiving end of this kind of legislation. Because once upon a time, the Republicans said, "Hey, hey, hey, we're a Christian nation, or we're a nation rooted in Christianity, right?" And so then they would say, "Well, we should be able to have these as part of our history." And then they lost. And then now, decade later, 10, 15, 20 years later, now it's the Republicans saying, "Hey, well, you know what? Maybe the government needs to be neutral." And I don't disagree, but I think I'm not impressed at the timing of it. And this is one of the reasons why I'm a libertarian, because Republicans, or in this particular case, the Democrats, if you will, would push for some sort of legislation or some sort of rule or whatever, and then the Republicans would squawk, and then later the Republicans would basically just do the same thing. And that's what's happening here. Once upon a time, it was the Democrats, the left, and they were pushing to remove 10 commandments and, other religious or oriented statues and monuments and stuff like that from government buildings, saying, "Hey, you have to be neutral." And then now here the Republicans, after they once upon a time were squawking and making a big complaint, now they're basically doing the same thing. But I have to give it to both of them. Like there is an argument here that the government should be neutral, and should they be flying flags? So it's up for you to decide. As for me, I think I think I just fall on. I think I fall on like The bill is not a problem in itself. The reasons, the real underlying reasons why Republicans are pushing this, to some extent, can be. But on the other hand, let's be honest. Um, Members of the LGBTQ community, you've kind of been, just you take swipes at people. You make this, you equally make this divisive, as do your opponents. Let's put it that way. Both sides are contributing to the divisive nature, because in reality, we should be able to have a society where you have a community that says, hey, we're proud to be who we are. And that could be the LGBTQ community, that could be the Black community, and that could be the white community. But so far, none of y'all are able to manage it. All right, let's move on to the next one. Let's see what we got here. So that was the pride. Oh, yes. This one is, I mean, we're going to be touching on some sensitive topics today. Like this next one is sensitive. I got a sensitive topic a little bit later. But this one is about reparations. So this one's kind of interesting. So let's go ahead and dive right into this one.
Florida voters could get a chance to decide whether to ban reparations for descendants of slaves next year under a joint resolution filed in the Florida Senate.
New at 6, Action News Jack's Jake Stofan reports the bill was filed despite the fact that there's been no serious attempt to pass reparations in the state.
Well, the joint resolution would prohibit the state or any local government here in Florida from paying reparations to the descendants of slaves. The Republican sponsor argues it's a way to prevent the idea from gaining traction here in the Sunshine State, but Florida Democrats argue it's just red meat for the GOP base. A joint resolution filed by State Senator Blaise Ingoglia would prohibit the state and local governments from paying reparations to the descendants of people who were enslaved prior to the ratification of the 13th Amendment. Ingoglia argues it's meant to prevent slavery reparations from gaining traction in the Sunshine State.
Slavery reparations aren't the answer. It's investing in Black and brown communities on things like education and infrastructure and opportunities. And that's what I think we should be talking about.
Jacksonville State Representative Angie Nixon, on the other hand, points out there have been no serious efforts or even any bills filed seeking to implement slavery reparations in Florida.
It's simply a bill to rile up the base so that they can raise money and they can distract from their failing leadership in Tallahassee.
Ingoglia countered there have been bills filed at the national level and in other states like California pushing for reparations. By putting a ban in the state constitution, he argues it would stifle any future efforts to do the same here in Florida.
Bad ideas that are proposed in other states seem to work its way into other states, such as Florida. This is a proactive way of making sure that we take the prospect of slavery reparations off the table.
But Nixon argues Republicans' time would be better spent focusing on issues currently impacting Floridians' pocketbooks and quality of life.
This property insurance crisis, this auto insurance crisis, the fact that our schools are hemorrhaging teachers, and the fact that people can no longer afford Florida.
Now, if the joint resolution is passed by supermajorities in both the Florida House and Senate, 60% of Floridians would still have to vote yes for the ban on reparations to make it into the state constitution. For local coverage you can count on downtown, I'm Jake Stofan, Action News Jacks.
All right. So there's actually some good points on both sides once again. Now, let me just kind of put this out there right from the beginning. I oppose the idea of reparations. I think it's a terrible idea. And a lot of the arguments in favor, they actually don't work on libertarians. One of the arguments that I often get is like, well, Native Americans got it, or Japanese Americans got it. So first and foremost, Japanese Americans that got it, they got it specifically because they themselves were put in an internment camp. So that's an entirely different level, because we're not talking about historical people that are no longer living. We're talking about the actual people that this thing happened to. Okay, so they're kind of in a different level. But then if you look at, like, say, Native Americans and other groups, I would say, what, they shouldn't get them either, right? So most of those arguments work maybe for conservatives, but they don't work really on libertarians so much. And at this point, from my perspective, the issue of reparations is it's too complicated to even try and work out. So think of it this way. I'm 20% Native American. So do I get reparations or do I not? Because if I were to really go back and research my heritage, I might find that I have a mixture of some people who were abused effectively, and then also some people who were the abusers. So which is it for me, right? Like which one do I get to claim? Also, my wife is from Indonesia. She came here for college, so she may be benefiting from the existing society that was built, but she had nothing whatsoever to do with slavery. She came here after it was long gone, right? And so those are the kind of issues that I think make reparations a very difficult conversation to have. Now, about this bill again is a very short bill. So I'm sympathetic to that, but I'm not so sympathetic to to actually implementing this bill. So let's take a look at it real quick. And the biggest issue that I have is, and we can go down here. It's just, I mean, this is it. This literally right here. Let's highlight that. Like it's like literally just a few lines. Payment of reparations prohibited. The state, a county, a municipality, or any other political subdivision may not pay compensation in the form of reparations to an individual who is a descendant of an enslaved individual who lived in the United States before December 6th, 1865. So I think this is interesting because they actually narrow it down to a specific date. But here are some of the issues that I have with the bill. Number one, I'm not a big fan of putting everything in our constitution. And I don't know what it is about Florida. I don't know how other states do this, but it seems like Florida is always looking to enshrine something in their constitution. So, on that note, I'm like, I want to like at some point your constitution just gets bloated, so it basically becomes, the equivalent of all the laws that are on the books, except it's harder to remove them. So I'm not a big fan of putting everything in the Constitution. The other thing that we have here is it says the state, a county, a municipality, or other political subdivision. Now, I know my libertarian peers are going to get upset at me. I'm not suggesting that it's a good idea that any local communities pay reparations. However, again, I kind of fall back to home rule where if Orlando wants to do a thing, why should I in Jacksonville be able to prevent them? Because that's what's going to happen here. This is a joint resolution that will come up for voters. So this would be me voting on what happens in Orlando, in Miami, in Alachua County, so on and so forth, right? And I tend to find this is not a good thing to do. So I generally oppose that. But I also oppose reparations. Now, I will make some interesting points here. I will note that I'm sorry, I don't want. What I meant to say is, I will note that that Representative Nixon did make some interesting points. Number one, it's not on the table. Nobody's making a serious argument for it, and I don't like this idea of trying to get ahead of things because that suggests that we can't have a good old fashioned debate and beat somebody's idea. It's like we got to beat them by getting to it first. And when it comes to enshrining things in our legal system, I think this is a bad idea. This leads to again just everybody fighting to get something enshrined in law. And instead of just saying, "Hey, let's have this debate." Like there are no actual bills in Florida. Now, to who is it, Guerrero? To his point, there have been things that have come about at the state and national level. So let me show you just one of those because I think it's kind of interesting. And it's actually something that I did a bill review on a year ago, 2 years ago, might have been 2 years ago. So let's put this up on the screen here. So what you're looking at is House Resolution. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger because that is so tiny. And we all know that we are too old to be looking at that tiny stuff. So HR 40, now this is out of Congress. This is at the federal level. House Resolution 40, Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act. Now, what I want to point out is This was sponsored by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee. And what's most interesting is the number of co-sponsors. They got 196 co-sponsors. So if we were to say that reparations has no momentum, I don't think that's necessarily accurate. It has some momentum somewhere. And I think it's a conversation that's worth having, not because I believe that reparations are a good idea, but because so many people do. And it's part of a larger conversation of, when it comes to the Black community, how best can the Black community rise up in their income status, and all the various measurements and metrics that we use when we're comparing different groups and where we're looking at where people are in a society. How best does the Black community advance forward? That's a conversation to have. We should have that conversation, but we should also be mindful that, yes, people are really putting forward bills. Now, in this particular case, this bill was actually just, they wanted to spend like $12 million to put together a commission to study reparations. And I was like, why would you do that? Like, 12 million, you're going to spend $12 million when you have all these organizations and people who have already done all the work. They've already studied it. Why does the government need to spend $12 million to do what's already been done? And then if you look in the bill, it kind of makes some proclamations that pretty much nobody disagrees with, because they're a matter of factual history, right? Like, slavery affected this many people. This many people were freed. They were freed on such and such day. Like, none of that really needs to be enshrined in law, because it's just a matter of historical record. So, but this did spend $12 million for people to study reparations and then submit proposals, right? So there is some level of seriousness in legislation, maybe not in Florida, but there is. Now, I will point out another thing from Representative Nixon. She said, look, there are things that the Republican Party could do that would be much more, a much better use of their time. And I absolutely agree. If we're going to have this conversation about reparations, and again, we're having a conversation because so many people believe in it. We're not, you can come to the table with the idea, no. That's why I would come to the table, no. Okay. But I need to come to the table with this idea in mind that I want to convince other people that is a bad idea. So we need to have the conversation. It doesn't need to be in law. Like, this is absurd. I don't think that it needs to be in our Constitution. And to Representative Nixon's point, if the Republicans were to do other things that they have the power to do, that would free up people, um, you know, give them more freedom to do things, to go about and find their own way, I think this conversation would find its way out the door, right? Like, instead of doing things that make that that leave people with more opportunities to prosper, instead of doing that, the Republicans want to put something on the ballot, which will only create more division, because we're just going to simply argue about it. You're going to have one side that says, hey, we need this. This is going to help us. And the other side's going to say, no, you don't. This is a terrible idea. You're stealing money from people that had nothing to do with it. Right. And we're just going to have this argument back and forth. And we're going to stay divided, where Republicans could just say, let's help people become more prosperous. Let's remove barriers and obstacles to people's success. Because when we do that, then the argument that you need reparations dies on its own, right? Like, this is how Republicans can win. And they don't have to propose resolutions that will cause us all to have a big debate and not get anywhere. Just go do things that will help make people more prosperous. Go find some legislation that has been passed that is an obstacle to people and remove it. Deregulate. I mean, if you're a libertarian, you already know deregulation is our thing. If you don't know, deregulation is our thing, right? Like, if you're watching or you're listening and you're not terribly familiar with libertarians, we love deregulation, because regulations tend to limit people from being prosperous. So it makes the argument stronger because people aren't being as prosperous. And so then they find some reason to blame. They generally don't blame it on laws and legislation that was passed. They don't blame it on that. They'll blame it on something else. And then we have a big debate and they're still not prosperous. So Republicans, make them prosperous. Them being everybody, actually. Anyway, so that's my little rant. When it comes to the bills, I get it. I oppose reparations as well, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I like the bill. That doesn't mean that I think that we necessarily should enshrine it in our Constitution. I think there are better ways to approach it, and if Republicans would just listen, But since they're not, hopefully the Libertarians will. All right, what else we got for today? What else do we have? Let's see here. I'm gonna go over to try to decide the order. I think I'm gonna I'm gonna play this next clip. Now, this next clip is a bit sensitive. There's some profanity, and regular audience members will know that I try to keep the profanity on at a minimum. I like to keep this a family-friendly show. The next clip is not so family-friendly. It's not crazy and bizarre, but I think it was. I do believe that it is worth talking about. I saw it on Twitter, and so I'm going to play this clip, and then we're going to talk about it afterward. So here we go.
Today, my whole life could change, and I'm scared. Friday night, I started having a burning sensation whenever I peed. Was not pleasant. So Saturday, I went to urgent care, and they put me on medication for a UTI. So I started the UTI medication on Sunday, and then that night I noticed that my right lymph node in my groin was swollen. By Monday, the UTI meds still haven't kicked in. It still really hurt whenever I peed. So I called to make an appointment with my gyno, and it's now Wednesday. My appointment's in like half an hour. This subject is very stigmatized, has a lot of shame around it, but then I noticed warts on my genitals. Very, very painful. These last few days, I've just felt run down, icky, haven't had an appetite, uncomfortable. It hurts to walk. It hurts to sit. Everything hurts. I'm scared. I'm scared. If it's herpes, I know it's not the end of the world. I'm about to go to my appointment now, so I will come back with an update. I have herpes. If I want to have unprotected sex, I have to tell them. I don't know how this is going to affect my dating life. I can't give birth vaginally if I have an outbreak. I don't know. I don't fucking know how I'm supposed to tell my parents this. It's also just fucking painful. And I'm gonna have these outbreaks for the rest of my life. I feel like my parents are gonna be so disappointed in me. I don't know.
All right, DL, why would you show this kind of video? Well, when I was scrolling through Twitter, I saw the video initially, and I clicked on it just to kind of see. I think one of my mutuals, somebody that I follow, had retweeted it, and they had made a comment, and I was like, "Oh, what's this about?" And so I was kind of curious, and so I watched the video, and I would have been the end of that. But then I started scrolling, and I saw some of the comments, and I was kind of like, "Wow, like really?" So I'm just going to read you some of the comments here. She's afraid her parents will be disappointed in her, but she's fine sharing TMI with TikTok. So bizarre. Here's another one. Literally effed around and found out. Let's see here. Let's see. I'm too scared to tell my parents. let me tell the entire effing world instead. And just goes on and on and on. And here's one that I think kind of represents where I'm at. Such a lack of sympathy on this post. Okay, premarital sex carries risk, and to some, it's a sin. But we live in a society that's been sexually liberated, and this is one possible outcome. So I say help the girl out. And they go on with some more thoughts. Here's my thing. Some of the comments were pretty mean. And they made a lot of suggestions about like, oh, well, like I think one person suggested that, hey, this is what happens when you sleep around. But here's the thing. This can happen if you just have sexual intercourse one time. Right? Like it only takes once. You don't have to rack up a body count to get into this particular situation. And the girl looks young, right? Who among us hasn't done something stupid when we were younger, right? And so on one hand, I get it. Should there be a stigma? Should we try to get away from a stigma? I don't think so. I think stigmas they tend to be a good thing. They do sometimes. Stigmas can get right up to the edge of something and then maybe cross over from where it was a valuable thing to now where it's just beating up on people. So stigmas have this natural reality where it can quickly go in the wrong direction. But she's already found out that she's got a stigma, right? Like this is going to happen. And she's now concerned, like, hey, how are my parents gonna, and I get it. Young people, why are you that's where we are as a society. We are in a situation where people go and their friends are not necessarily limited to a school. Because like when I was young, I get it, old folks. I'm an old too. When I was young, I told my friends a lot of things that I didn't tell my parents. And now friends include online, and you go online and you share stuff. Now, that's not my thing. I don't particularly think it's a good idea. I mean, I think there is something to be said. It's like, maybe you don't go in and post a video on it. Okay. I think that's fair. That is fair to say, hey, maybe we don't do that. Maybe you have a conversation with some close friends first. You work it out with your parents. Then, if you still feel that there's a value add to other people, then maybe you share it. But again, this kind of is similar to how the Republicans are responding with the reparations. There is a conversation to be had. There is in this particular case, a stigma that I think is a value add. You have a stigma about something, it helps prevent people from potentially making life altering decisions, right? Like this is now going to affect this young woman for the rest of her life. There's also how society responds. And I think the more that we get online, the more we have to fight to be a little bit more compassionate. That doesn't mean that you pretend like something didn't happen. That just means, hey, you recognize this person understands where they are. Now it's time for a little bit of compassion. And some of these comments, they don't, they're not that. There's something vile, in my opinion, because we want people to come to us or we want people to heed our advice. They don't do that when we're being mean to them, when they make a bad decision. They don't come to us. They don't heed that advice. They ignore it. And they listen to the people that at least give them the courtesy of not being mean. And that is one of the reasons why people make bad decisions. It's not the only reason. I mean, some people just they need to learn to make better decisions. Part of that sometimes, unfortunately, is making bad ones. I suspect that this young lady, whatever she did that got her, whether she went out to a bar, whether it was a boyfriend, whatever the case may be, I suspect she won't be making that decision again. And she has clearly, in my opinion, she has learned. So now it's time for a little bit of compassion. Now, that doesn't mean that we wipe everything away and say, hey, it's no big deal. No, it is a big deal, right? It is still a big deal. And yes, you should do those things that you said. If you want to have unprotected sex, yes, you need to let your partner know. Those are good things. So we're not washing away responsibility. What we're doing is we're saying, let's take responsibility from our own and how we respond. One of the titles, not the title, one of the slogans for this show is preparing for tomorrow's conversation by how we engage today. And this is what I'm always trying to think about when I think about having a conversation. I want to prepare for tomorrow's conversation. I can't be prepared and be somebody that's going to be part of that conversation if I'm a jerk today. And it doesn't matter what topic it is. It doesn't matter whether it's, somebody that went out and they had, a little bit too much premarital fun, or if we're talking about reparations. If I'm a jerk today, tomorrow they're not going to listen. And that's the message that I wanted to bring about with this particular video, is that we need to pay more attention, be more mindful about the conversations today. Because if we want a better world tomorrow, and I do, my son's 5. I want a better world for him tomorrow and the next day and the next. And so I really work hard to make sure that my conversations today put me in a position to be able to have another conversation with whomever tomorrow, whether it's my son, my wife, or some stranger on the internet. I want people to listen to me. And the only way that I can do that is to build the reputation that I'm worth listening to. And part of that means learning when to have some compassion. All right, that's enough of that. It's very sad. I would be heartbroken if my son, felt like that, to have to come to me and would feel like I would be so disappointed. And I probably would be, right? But we'd get past it. Anyway, let's let's end the show on something a little bit lighter, a little bit more positive. Something I'm kind of excited about, actually. So let's see, where are you here? Let's get to that. This is kind of exciting for me. It's a brand new development. You probably saw it if you follow me on Twitter. You probably saw it last night. So here's what we got. Just cut right to it. We're going to be doing a debate. I'm hosting a debate on this channel. Not in the morning, though. I'm going to spare you guys because I don't think that anybody wants to wake up at like 7 a.m. to do a debate. I'm pretty sure that there's like never in the history has anybody had a debate at 7 a.m. in the morning. I mean, maybe they did, but nobody wants that. Nobody wants to get up for that, to be in the debate. Nobody wants to get up to watch a debate. But we're going to have a debate. Gentleman named Roger Mayhem. Now, I need to find out if that's actually his name. Pretty sure it's not his name. And then Kyle, and I'm just going to call him M. Kyle M. Because I haven't asked him how to pronounce that name. But don't worry, folks. Once we get to the actual debate, I'll learn how to pronounce everybody's names properly. They're going to be debating libertarians in Israel. Now, what does that mean? There's like, I don't want to say anti-Israel and pro-Israel, but for lack of better words, we'll just call it that. There's anti-Israel sentiment in the libertarian community. There's pro-Israel sentiment also in the libertarian community. And when I say Israel, we don't mean Jews. We mean literally Israel, the government. Okay. The entity that is the government of Israel. That's what they're going to be debating. And they're going to be debating kind of like, what side should libertarians take? Now, Roger is more in the pro and Kyle is more in the anti. And we're going to have this debate December 29th at 8 p.m. from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Now, you might be asking yourself, DL, why would we have a debate when people like Scott Horton and Dave Smith have already said everything that libertarians need to know about it? Or they've already been and had some debates, right? Dave Smith debated, what was it, Laura Loomer just recently, like what, less than a month ago? So why do we, here's why. The other day, was it yesterday? Maybe it was yesterday. But the other day, I said, we need to put out more stuff, right? We need to be more engaged in these conversations so that when people talk about what is and is not libertarian, they know what it is because they've heard it so much. Also, I'm a big advocate that we continually try to hone our own selves. This is an opportunity for two people to debate and hone their own skills in having a debate. We need more of this. We're a small community. We need to improve our communication skills. We need to improve the amount of content that we put out. We need to improve a lot of things in order for more people to hear the message. And I think that despite the fact that Dave and Scott have said a lot, at least on the anti-Israel, and again, we're not anti-Jew, anti-Israel. And it's really their policies, their foreign policies, right? I don't necessarily know where they stand about like domestic policies. I don't think they've really talked much about domestic policies, but foreign policies, yes, they've had a lot to say about it. And we need to raise up the next generation because one day the Scott Hortons and the Dave Smiths, they're going to be too old or they're going to be gone. I mean, let's just face reality, right? And we're going to need the new generation to come up. And the new generation needs to have their opportunity. They need to have their moment where they can show themselves as somebody that other people might want to listen to. And I mean, who doesn't love a good old fashioned debate anyway? So we're going to have a debate Saturday, December 29th, 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. They're going to be debating libertarians in Israel. And I will put out a little bit more information as time gets closer. So keep an eye on that. Otherwise, that is the show for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I want to thank you for watching. Let's take a look at some of the comments here. It looks like I have a good fair amount of comments. So let's kind of backtrack a little bit and see what we've got. Let's see. I agree. 10 Commandments doesn't belong on state property, separation of church and state. Don't disagree with that. Although I will admit that I don't make it a big issue to remove monuments if they're already there. Like we shouldn't put anything new, but if something already exists, I don't think that I don't think there's a value in spending a lot of energy in fighting about it. Like move on, whatever. Let's see. Keith Garrett says, okay, he says, I can be sympathetic without needing to fix other people or their problems. The government should not be into charity. It has one job, and that's not it. Absolutely agree. And I think we do need to be sympathetic to various things, right? Whether it's reparations or young teenagers getting themselves into a bit of a predicament, a lifelong predicament. We need to learn to be sympathetic. Look at that. My producer has joined me, folks. And right on time because I'm at the closing. So anyway, that's all the comments that I have for today. Thank you for watching. Hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me every morning, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern, for an informed discussion on politics and culture. On that note, I do want to point out that yesterday's show did actually happen. If you're a Rumble watcher, Rumble has this weird thing where you can stream to your user account or your channel, and I accidentally streamed to the user account. So I'm going to try and get that moved over. I've already emailed Rumble's support team to try to figure out how to resolve that. So if you missed yesterday's because you're watching on Rumble, well, then I tell you what, how about you do this? You go to youtube.libertydad.com and you watch yesterday's episode. But otherwise, folks, youtube.libertydad.com. You can also go to rumble.libertydad.com. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Throw me in a comment. I do read all the comments. Don't necessarily get them all on air, but I at least go through and I try to read them. And let me know. Let me know how I'm doing. Like, DL, your show's terrible. You should talk only about this. I don't know. We'll see what goes, but let me know. Lastly, if you are a champion of liberty, then your business is people, folks. People. Your business is people, compassion, sympathy, and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. For now, I'm out.